Hello, and welcome to Book Circle Presents The Lion Knights. The Lion Knights are set in the same setting as the Cavalry Cycle. If you're familiar with the Cavalry Cycle, you know that Captain Fletcher and his lads are primarily explorers. The Lion Knights is about one of the things they discover when they're out exploring, something that is at least as surprised to discover them. First installment, The Lion Host. It was a mountain of centuries, sloping up from the highest antiquity we can conceive, up and up like a mountain whose summit never comes into sight, not to eternity where the thought can rest, but into more and still more time, into freezing wastes and silence of unnameable numbers. From That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. Gus stared out the window down the slope of the town to the bay. It was a great view, despite being from the ground floor. The rambling old castle had long ago shed its walls, and this wing of it was planted on a steep hillside. The scene would make a great tourist shot. And send it home how? Maybe bring it on that ship. The nice view showed they were valued, another gesture of gratitude, along with the bonus on their pay for all they went through defending that caravan. Gus still did not feel overpaid. Are they still there? Yep, he answered. I'm looking at their ship right now. They'll be here another month at least. But do we know what a month is for them? Remember that place where we nearly missed the wagon train? Yeah, but they had that extra moon there. Don't worry. 30 days. They said so themselves. Who, these Normans or whatever? Yep, Gus answered. The guy said month, then he said 30 days at least. Gus carefully kept his tone equable. Doug's fretting was annoying, but Doug had every right to be shaken. And holy crow, how he needed Doug. People are people only through other people. Wasn't that what that African philosophy said? He and Doug kept each other believing there were people. There was room for doubt. 30 days at least, he repeated, now trying not to sound like a nanny, and the guy should be here any time now. 30 days at least, the man had said, and he had said exactly that in English. Gus had asked in English after hearing them use it a bit. He'd wanted to talk on and on with the man about anything, the weather, where to find a good restaurant, baseball teams, as long as it was in English. Instead, he just thanked him and asked more directions, noting how the guy looked at him. Gus could nearly hear him think, why is someone like you speaking English? And the accent would have made it odder. He stared hungrily at the Grand Norman ship, the GNNV Bethos. It was a blend of old and new. It looked like a 19th century clipper ship or a schooner or something. Gus didn't know ships. Except that the hull was white and made of fiberglass or stuff like that, and it had a radio mast and radar and running lights that shone all night and electric light in the cabins. The name on the side was in regular letters. It flew bright flags of red and blue, spangled with gold lions and fleur-de-lis, symbols he knew. It made Gus' mouth water. A ship from Earth? Maybe they could tell him what was going on and where they were and how many what? Miles, light years, planes, how far they were from home, and if they could get back. Ever. Gus heard clopping in the hall, then a knock. Good. Comin', he said. From long habit, one hand hovered near his scabbard as he reached for the door with his other. Deliberately, he switched and opened the door with his sword hand. Don't borrow trouble. Gus saw a centaur. The equine body was dun, fawn with dark brown legs and tail. The human body was that of an old man with flowing white hair and beard, wearing a ruddy brown heavy-duty jacket, a uniform jacket such as Gus had seen on both two- and four-legged folk on the docks. Below the jacket hung a belt bearing a holstered revolver, a walkie-talkie, a knife, and other miscellany. The man-horse held a cowboy hat in his left hand, removed it to aid in ducking through the door, since he stood 7 feet tall. Gus knew about that, as he knew about soldiering. The creature offered his right hand to Gus. He took it, fleetingly grateful at the lack of hesitation, given what his hand now looked like. "Captain Sams, you asked to meet. I'm Captain Fletcher." He spoke British-accented English, a little Oxbridgey, and sounded perfectly human except for a hint of reverb. "That's right, Virgil Sams. Call me Gus. Come on in. Thanks for coming. Thanks a lot." He then caught himself grinning and remembered the teeth, but it was too late. Fletcher picked his way carefully into the room. In expectation, Gus had moved some furniture aside to make room. In a spark of inspiration, he had hauled in a throw rug from another room and put it on the stone floor. He now gestured at it, and Fletcher settled down comfortably. He gave Gus a curious look. "Not the Virgil Sams." Gus laughed. "The galaxy'd be in poor shape if the Virgil Sams was me, wouldn't it? Nope, that's just an alias, a nom de guerre." He held up his forearms with loose fists displaying the wrists. "No lenses?" Fletcher stared at the wrists with interest and took a few seconds to examine the rest of Gus. Likewise, Gus looked over Fletcher for more details, like the mundane appearance of the gear at his belt, the fact that he was shod just like a horse, and the chestnut over crossed arrows emblem on his jacket and hat. Fletcher saw a big man, humanoid. His size and build made Fletcher think of American football, apparently a game for young giants. Gus was tall as Fletcher. His accent had prompted the Football Association, since it was American, not the gruff East Coast one or the yawning Southern one, but the flat, twanging middle one delivered in a husky tenor. An American troll, Fomor, something. The arms he held up to show he was no lensman were a human shade of light brown, but the skin was covered in horny knobs like crocodile hide, in roughly rectangular array, coarser on the back of the arms, finer on the underside and the backs of the hands. The nails were very thick. On the right hand they were trimmed normally, but on the left they were shaped into claws. There were stubby horns on the knuckles. Thin, even blonde hair grew between the plates, to give back the sense of touch lost under the thick skin, Fletcher guessed. Gus was wearing a light open vest with pants and boots. Fletcher could see the plating getting even coarser up the arms and across the chest and belly. The effect reminded him of a comic book hero, American again, called simply The Thing, a monstrous hero, a transformed man. Fletcher could relate. The neck was armored, but the face was mammalian and free of plating. Gus had a very short muzzle, as if his mouth had grown forward to be even with his nose. The effect was rather cat-like, though there was no little moist patch at the tip. The lips looked human, but just outside the ends of the shaven mustache area sprouted foot-long cat whiskers. The upper nose and the blue eyes looked entirely human. Well, yes, the eyes were cat-like and slit-pupiled, but eyeballs aren't really very individual. It's the surrounding face you go by, the lids and eyebrows, and these looked human, waving two closely spaced bunches of shorter whiskers above the bridge of the nose. Gus had a Neanderthal-like brow ridge. His ears were mobile, pointed, and had their own whiskers. His hair was in a military crew cut, sandy brown. The big deviation was the tail, tufted and lion-like, though covered with armored skin rather than fur between the tuft and the base of the spine. The end swayed just above the floor. Gus saw Fletcher examining. He turned his hands out to show the palms, which looked human, spread his arms in display, and slowly turned around. Fletcher saw heavy plates on the back of his neck and the tailoring that accommodated the tail. "Thank you," Fletcher said when Gus had turned all the way around, "for indulging my curiosity." "Oh, I have my own reasons to give you a good look. I'll strip if you want. I'm hoping you can tell us what we are." "You don't know?" And a moment later for the penny to drop. "Us?" Gus gestured toward a table that had been displaced for Fletcher's convenience. Behind it was a shadowy alcove containing a bed. A figure hoisted itself up from the bed, t-shirted, another alligator lion man, black-haired, brown-eyed, the skin a less ruddy shade of brown, the eyes oriental. He started to wave the stump of a right arm, then switched to his complete left arm. "Hi." "Doug," said Gus. "Douglas Adams, 'nother nom de guerre. He's under the weather right now." Doug smiled and gave Fletcher a tired left-hand salute. Fletcher returned it, noting the teeth in the smile. Doug turned the salute into a wave, then sank back out of sight. "I'm sorry for your injury, Mr. Adams," Fletcher said, raising his voice slightly to reach the bed, though he suspected his hosts had excellent hearing. "We'd be a lot more upset about it," Gus answered for his roommate, "if we didn't know it would grow back. It's started to already. We saw the same with another pal." He curled his tail around and looked at it meditatively. "I've had this cut off twice. For a trophy, I think, both times. Grew back in a month. A hungry month. A tired month." He nodded at Doug's bed. "But it grew back. As for what we know about what we are..." He walked over to the table before Doug's bed and rummaged, then handed Fletcher 2 plastic cards. They were both old and scuffed, but both had pictures. Driver's licenses, Fletcher supposed. Fletcher had not been in a position to drive a car for decades. With only a little imagination, you could see that one was Doug, Douglas Shengming Chiang, 6 foot 3 inches, and one was Gus, August Virgil Weisskopf, 6 foot 1 inch. Both perfectly human. "That's how we started." Fletcher nodded thoughtfully and handed them back. "When you started what?" he asked. "Please tell me about it. And why are you asking me?" "I'm asking you because I watched you during the trade talks. People kept coming up to you, your juniors, but also all sorts of other folk. People of higher rank, people of different sides and different species, asking questions, getting answers, even though you've never been here before." "You must have asked around to determine all that." "Yeah, I did. And I learned that what you are mainly is a teacher, and what you teach is exploring, and you'll talk peaceably with anybody." "Well, with almost anybody." "Good enough. And you speak English. And we could really, really use a teacher." "To teach you what you are?" "And where we are, and what the hell has been happening to us for the last, 2 or 3 years. Fletcher regarded Gus for a few seconds, then said, "I'll do what I can. Now, please tell me about yourself." "Doug and I are both from Chicago. You know where that is?" Fletcher nodded, which earned another jack-o'-lantern grin. So much hungry joy at meeting someone who had merely heard of his home. "We met when we enlisted, did a 2-year hitch in the Army together in Afghanistan. When we got out, we kind of missed it, but not enough to re-enlist. We met up with a couple of other guys who felt the same, Neil and Aaron, and decided to set up as mercenaries. Called ourselves the Windy City Squad." Gus paused and gave Fletcher a cautious look. "You okay with mercs?" he asked. Fletcher nodded. "A common profession in Grand Normandy. I've worked with them. Mercs are fine as long as they're honest and not bloodthirsty." Gus relaxed a hair, nodded back, and continued. "So we blew out to Iraq and looked around for work, and we were picked up by this woman, and that was unusual right there, who said she was recruiting for a company that would supply support for a city near the Iran border, backup and training and tech support for the local police and the Iraqi force stationed there. Besides us, she got some Brits and a couple of Canadians and some guys from New Zealand and Australia and some Indians. Wanted everyone to have a common language. 27 in all. When she decided she'd got enough, or all she was going to get, she threw us a big party to welcome us aboard before we shipped out. Put up a big marquee in the middle of the desert outside Baghdad. Great band. Great jugglers, acrobats, stage magicians. I wondered about them later. Hostesses to dance with, utterly gorgeous, some Middle Eastern, some European, some Indian, or that's how they looked. I don't really remember the end of it. Woke up in quarters. I remember this so well. Someone was yelling and it sounded too loud somehow. My head felt crawly, but I didn't feel hungover. And I felt like someone was giving me a wedgie or something. Do you know what a wedgie is? Fletcher waved the question away. So I opened my eyes and yawned, and my mouth felt funny, and stretched, and I saw my arms. He looked down at them. And I jumped out of the bunk and saw the rest of me, and my butt felt weird. And in the other bunk I saw Doug. I knew it was Doug because I've seen his back plenty of times before, but he was all scaly, and he'd kicked off his sheet, and there was a tail sticking out of the leg of his shorts. So I twisted around, and I catch a glimpse of something and feel something knocking on the bunk, and sure enough, I have a tail. He waved it demonstratively as he spread his hands. My shorts were jammed up under it, and that was the wedgie. And I go to the mirror, and I see why my head felt crawly, all ears and whiskers. Doug was now sitting up, looking alert, though Fletcher could see it was an effort. Somewhere in there you started yelling, "Doug, Doug." Did I? Don't remember that. You did. So I wake up and go through pretty much the same thing, and we're yelling, "What's this?" and "What's going on?" and "Is this real?" And the yelling from the hall is getting louder, so we look out and see all your fellows transformed as you were, Fletcher concluded. Yep, said Gus, and we're all yelling questions at each other and building up to a panic, and then Dagny steps in with a couple of her folks. Dagny? Fletcher asked. That was the woman who hired us. Called herself Dagny Flynn, but sometimes it was O'Flynn or sometimes Finn. Careless, murmured Fletcher. Yeah, she was the one who told us to pick out nom de guerres. Fletcher carefully ignored the mangled plural. Then she screws her own around. But she was hot, tall and toned with that black Irish coloring. Had some relatives with her, it looked like, 4 guys and 2 other girls, all black-haired and pale-skinned and tall. They all stepped into the hall then, and Dagny yelled, "Silence!" And we did. I don't know why, really, or why we didn't go for her. We were expecting a speech, but she just said, "I have made you over for battle. You are my lions now, de Gorodell's lions." Rauerhoth y de Gorodell, Doug muttered. She said it over again in her language. We were the Rauerhoth. It was important. Names are important, Fletcher agreed. We were her Rauerhoth, Gus amplified. That was even more important. You are my Rauerhoth and very dear to me. I'm sure, said Fletcher. Transforming 27 men even moderately is a great deal of magic. There was more magic coming, Gus said. She and her family just started giving orders, and we obeyed. We were scared not to. If she could do this to us, what else could she do? And who else could turn us back? So we went to the lockers to gear up, but everything was different. The stuff in our backpacks was pretty much the same, but instead of khakis, we had homespun pants and light capes to put on, and swords with belts and scabbards. I remember thinking, I don't know how to use a sword, but we took guns too. The pants had a kind of button-up fly in the back, like these, for our tails. Then they marched us out. It was still night. We were at the edge of town to start with, and we marched straight out into the desert. Not in cadence, they didn't care, they just wanted us to hike fast, straight north. To the Dust Devil, Doug put in. Yeah, it was a clear night and calm, but there was a dust devil out there, not moving, just spinning, steady as a rock. Our ride. I remember that so well. Marched miles, but didn't get tired or cold. I could feel the cold on my face, but nowhere else, even though we were just wearing t-shirts under those capes. I remember marching beside Doug, always glancing at each other, thinking, that's how I look now, worrying about being seen by civilians, ordinary folk, muggles. Mundane miners, Fletcher supplied. Okay, but I think I really mean humans. And tails! Everyone's switching their tails like angry cats, getting used to them. Holy crow, I don't know what was spookier, walking straight up to that pillar of wind and dust that just stood there waiting for us, or ourselves, me, being able to see it clear by starlight, my new tail all twitchy, and not knowing what I was. Still don't, Doug muttered, sinking back onto his bed. Was it hard getting used to your new height? Fletcher asked. No, we started at our old height. We brought some of our old clothes and they still fit. I suppose the new height all of a sudden would have made us clumsy. Fletcher nodded. It took a few months to put the extra head on our height. Don't say it like that, Doug said, spurred into sitting up and glaring at Gus. Put an extra head on? It's the sort of thing she could have done. Gus winced but continued. Came out somewhere else. Mountainous, but lots of lakes and patches of forest, castles, citadels surrounded by wilderness. They were carved straight into the rock, hardly any masonry, and way open to the sky, but that didn't matter because no one seemed to mind the cold. No farms. Our sky, but the pole was in Orion's belt. Our moon, but only half as wide. The sun, too. No questions answered. Kept you unsure and dependent, Fletcher noted. We figured later. So after getting our bodies changed and the scenery changed, we still wound up doing what you hire mercs for. We stood guard and took care of equipment and trained and sometimes led raids. Who were you fighting? Another crew like hers, said Gus dismissively. The Dagorendor and his crew, his family. That's what she called them when she talked about them at all. We saw them a couple of times at parleys. We think it was a straight territorial dispute, but like I said, they didn't answer questions much. They just wanted to point us and pull the trigger. And who did you train? Little people, the size of 8 or 10-year-old kids, but adults. Looked like Middle Easterners, but could have been Latin American or Polynesian just as well. Tell me more about them. They had guns already, but it was our job to take care of the guns for them, even to loading for them, and to keep training them when new ones wandered in. They lived in the forests, in burrows, I think. De Goradel would put out the call for training sessions, and sometimes new ones came, and they'd show up for more ammo. They really weren't very smart. We led them on raids, but one of the Aussies said it was more like taking dogs hunting than leading troops. At first we thought it was just the language barrier, but we finally decided they didn't have much language. Names of things and people and qualities, exclamations, one-word orders, sometimes jumbled them together, but didn't really make sentences. If you thought of them as people-shaped dogs, they were really clever. But if you thought of them as people, they were only a bit smarter than dogs. But not like mentally deficient, not the same holes in their minds. I liked some, didn't like others. In that way, they were more like people. I just plain liked dogs. It was way easier for us to learn their language than to teach them ours. Turned out it was crumbs off the language of the boss and her folks. We asked to learn, but they, the boss and her family, gave us the brush off. They didn't want us to learn it. But some of the servants didn't mind and would talk to us. They were some other breed, full-sized and brown-skinned, and there were a couple of prisoners. Oh, yeah, about them. They were talking dogs. Canines, anyway. As big as ponies, sort of like wolf-coated giant Rottweilers, only even stockier. Called themselves Faradhuar. That's what most of the enemy's troops were. They were happy to give language lessons. They weren't kept in cells. They wandered freely around the citadel, on their parole, I guess. Probably oath-bound. Yeah. Anyway, then we found out the language was called Sindarin, and Hank, I think it was, said, "That's Elvish, Tolkien Elvish." Well, that would have sounded silly at one point, but not now. Was there really a War of the Ring? Doug asked wistfully. Fletcher shrugged. There is a Red Book of Westmarch written in Sindarin and Quenya, and it's full of tales. Even conservative scholars agree there were big mage wars late in the last ice age. That's as far as we know, or guess. Many people do believe in the Ring War. Human facial expression depends on mouth and eyebrows. Feline facial expression depends on ears and whiskers. Gus looked unhappy both ways at once. Thing is, if Tolkien's true, we're orcs. Fletcher cleared his throat and said in his best commanding officer's barracks-filling voice, "You are not orcs." Then less loudly, as my lieutenant is fond of saying, monstrous is as monstrous does. Yeah, seconded Doug, and if Tolkien's true, there ought to be some good elves around too, right? Fletcher nodded. Certainly. We have some as our main allies. Okay, said Gus. Good. But if we're not orcs, what are we? I'm still working that out. Please go on. So, you started learning Sindarin. Yeah, and realized Dagorodel was just a title, war lady, not a real name. And Dagorendor was warlord. Anyway, the boss found out pretty soon, but sort of shrugged it off. I think she knew it would happen sooner or later. What she said was she didn't think we cared about learning a new language since we weren't going to be there long. A mistake, said Doug. It got us wondering how long we'd been there. What year is it, Captain Fletcher? 2018. Damn! Doug pounded the table with his one fist. So it was 3 years after all, Gus said glumly. He explained to Fletcher, we were hoping it was more like 2015 or 16. You see, we lost track of time. When we got free, we tried to figure out how many years we'd been there, tried to remember winters. We guessed 1, 2, or 3, he couldn't decide. He pulled a chair up to the table and sat down to brood. Fletcher shifted a little on the rug so that, with Doug sitting on his bed, the three of them now shared the table. We hoped it was 1 year, Doug said, because that's all our actual contract was for, back on Earth. And even if it was a magic contract, it ought to have expired. By the end of the first year, Fletcher said, you simply belonged to her. She didn't need an oath any longer. It didn't matter if it had expired. And we'll find out more about this curious mass kidnapping next time.